Welcome to lesson 10. In this lesson, we're going to develop a resource module plugin, and we'll continue the development of this plugin in the following lesson. We are going to look at the data definition API, including the database manager class. We're going to look at the upgrade API. We're going to revisit the form API, and we're going to talk about third-party libraries. I know we've been through this a number of times so far in the course, especially in our tour in lesson 1, looking at resources modules in courses, and we've used a couple of them in previous lessons. This lesson's a bit different because I've regenerated my test course, and along here we have what are known as modules. Now, modules are divided into two. We've got activities, which, like assignments here, are activities, and we have resources, which are simply sort of static type of resources. Now, up here we have the forum, which is an activity, and we've got small files, which is a resource. So if we turn editing on, and I come along and I want to add a resource, so we've got everything together. So these are our activities in that are available for us to include in our course, and these are our resources, so URL, etc., etc. So this is what they are, and the settings for these will be are slightly different. We've got settings that are common to all modules, and we have settings that are common to resource modules, and we have common settings for activities. So if you look at this, I've picked a page. There's not really much in there. The common module settings different between resources and activities, but I think both of these plus an extra one, I'll show you that just now. And then we've got these common things that are across the board. Okay, so I'll cancel that, and let's pick an assignment and edit the settings. And if we go down here, we've got availability, we've got submission types. So that's because this is an assignment. We've got notifications. Our common module settings are different. Availability is there. There's no group modes in resources, so we have ID number. That was the difference. Okay, and then we've got these common ones that sit across all the modules. We are going to develop a resource course module. Okay, so our resource module is going to be called Wikipedia Snippet, and the aim of it is to allow the lecturer, tutor, teacher to include snippets of pages from Wikipedia into their lessons. So let's go ahead and create our directory, which will live in the mod folder, and we'll create a new folder for it. Again, we will do the language folders at the same time. Our first file, as usual, will be version PHP. So here's our file with the usual properties defined, and our component name is mod underscore Wikipedia snippet. Now, modules are a bit of a funny thing in Moodle because a lot of times you don't really use the mod underscore like you do with all the other components and plugins. This is a legacy thing, and a lot of times the name of your when you refer to your mod, you don't you just refer to it by its name. So we'll see some of this in action. Okay, so let's create our language file. So new PHP file, and this is an example of where you don't use the Frankenstein name for your even the language file. So we just have Wikipedia snippet PHP. So this is our language file, and for modules we need to define a few more strings than just the normal plugin name. So we have to define module name plural, so Wikipedia snippet, Wikipedia snippets, and then a module name underscore help for a help string. Yeah, so that's our language file. Now for modules there is another required file, and that file is install.xml in your DB folder, and this file defines the tables for your plugin. This is the only example or the only plugin type in Moodle where you need to define your tables before you even install. With all the other ones, if you remember, I kept on saying we install, then we go to our DB XML tool and create our tables. Whereas with modules, unfortunately, you have to define them before. So one of the easiest things is to copy a simple one from another module, change the names, etc., and use that as the basis of your install XML, and then use the DB tool once you've installed to play around with extra fields, etc., etc. So before we dive into our XML, our install.xml file, let's have a look at the data definition API. So let's look at the data definition API. This API allows you to create, change, delete tables and fields in the database, particularly during upgrades. Plugins must use this API to manage table schemas, as there's that high-level abstraction that ensures that the resultant table will work, or the resultant tables will be valid in the supported databases. And upgrades are handled by the upgrade API, which we'll discuss a little bit later on. Okay, so the initial schema definition for tables is done in the plugins install.xml file in the DB folder. Now, that's what I've said a little earlier on. This is the file that is used to create the tables when the plugin is first installed, and it must always contain the most up-to-date definitions. So as you go version to version, you update your install XML if you change your data schema, and it must always be the latest version of the tables that are required for the version that the person has installed. Okay, this is important because if you don't do that, you end up with a mismatch between what your code is expecting to be in the tables and what the tables actually are. Okay, Moodle tables are normally named with a prefix. Okay, and that prefix is defined in our config.php file. Therefore, when you're stipulating table names in code, you do not mention the prefix. What happens is it's automatically prefixed on the name when the call is made to the database, because that can change. The default is MDL underscore. So when you want to use the data definition API, you usually will do it via the global database manager class, which is defined in the file that's on the screen there. And you normally get an instance of that class by calling the global DB. We've met that before, the database, the global database connection, get manager method. All the objects used for data manipulation are extensions of XMLDB underscore object. And again, I've given you the file, the place where it's defined, and you've namely got three kind of objects. There you've got your table, your field, and your index. And in most cases, you are always passing one of the objects to the methods in the database manager class. Okay, there are quite a few constants defined, as you would expect, for the for the manager. Oh, it's defined in the manager for the use of the data definition API. So your database field types like integer, number, float, text, etc. Indexes and keys, so key primary, key foreign, index, etc. And then there are other constants like not null, sequence, unique, and not unique. So these are the constants that are used when working with the definition API. Right, so you got some methods. So you can check if a table exists, etc. Drop a table. You can create fields, check if fields exist, change their names, rename fields, etc. And then the same with indexes. You can check if it exists, find an index, drop an index, etc. So there's a link to the documentation there in this presentation for you to go and have a look at the documentation itself. Okay, so since your install XML file has the latest definitions of your database tables, what happens if somebody is upgrading? Well, if they're upgrading and you have made changes to your schema, then you need to manage how do you get that person's database to reflect the latest version of the database that you need to have, as will be specified in your install XML file. So the upgrade API uses the data definition API functionality to actually take your tables from one version to the next, to the latest version. Okay. The upgrade API that's its main function, is to get your tables up to that to the level at which install XML would make tables if you're installing brand new. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Okay, right. So the upgrade API is called in your DB in your upgrade.php file in your DB folder, and it should contain code that is specific to each upgrade change in a single function. And that's the function. So you've got your plugin type, plugin name, so your component name, your Frankenstein name underscore upgrade prefixed with XML DB underscore. And for examples, an example, I will have a look at an example of what I'm talking about, but there's a link in this presentation again to look at the upgrade API. So what I've done here is I've defined an upgrade PHP file as an example of what we are going to do. So I've created a folder called DB, and the file is sitting in there, and it's called upgrade.php. Okay, and what would generally be happening is that now would really be something like, I'm not sure whether you have to use the mod underscore. We'll just pretend that we have to, and then that is called during upgrade, and then the old version, the version that's currently installed in Moodle, will be passed through to this function. Okay, and so if you remember our version, which is 0517 there, we're pretending that we have had a version before then we would pick up that our old version is less than let's say the person was upgrading from an old version. If the version was older than 0516, we would then be able to manipulate the tables to bring it up to the version, to that version's copy of the tables. And then if the version is smaller than our current version, then we again do some stuff. So each bit of this will take the table to the schema that's required for that particular version. And upgrade PHP is not just for modules, it is used for all the components that require tables to operate. So now we're going to define our install XML file, which is going to sit in the same folder. So we'll just create a new file. Okay, and this is our file. So the usual stuff for XML, you do define a path, versions, and then some description, etc. Okay, so there's the heading bit, the heading bits, and then the stuff that we're really interested in is our tables. So inside our tables, we then define each table. So we've got our table, and then we've got our fields. I'm just going to move this to the side a little bit so we can see the file. Actually, I'll do this. Okay, so we have our each field with its name, type, length, etc. And that's how it's defined. Now, standard, what's expected to be in this file for modules are these fields up to there. So ID, course name, intro, and intro format. And these two other fields, time created and time modified. Your primary key will be your ID, and your you might index your course field as well. You could add in more, but this is the kind of basic one. Now I've gone ahead and added in some extra fields in here to do with our plugin. Okay, I'm not going to go through using the DB XML tool in this course, but we'll probably have a separate video on YouTube or something going through how you work with DB XML tool. But for now, I've just defined the extra fields that I require for our plugin, and it's got wiki, URL, no images, no links, inside citations. Okay, so that's kind of obvious what this is doing. In fact, actually right now we could go ahead and install our module. So let's do that. Okay, let's log in as admin, and let's install our module. Right, so if we attempt to add our module to a course, let's just choose the banner topics, turn editing on, add an activity or resource. We'll notice that we're still not available here. That really means we need to add more functionality, and the functionality needs to go into libphp, and we will need to define a form which the user will use when adding, editing, and deleting our module. So let's go back to our code. Let's log off. So back in our code, let's just close the upgrade PHP file. We're not going to use that. I'm going to leave install XML open for now. We'll probably need to look at some of the fields, and let's create our libphp file. So new PHP file, lib.php. So this is our libphp file with the usual stuff, some functions defined. Okay, so the first function that is defined is Wikipedia snippet supports, and then it gets passed in a feature. Okay, the feature is constant and is used by the core to determine if a module supports a particular feature. It also allows us to define what kind of module we are. Okay, so we are looking at the case of feature mod intro. Do we support an introduction for our module? Yes, we do. We return true. We then tell it the type of module we are, which is a resource, so that's also a constant setting. And then for the rest of the lot, we return null. So right now, those are the only kind of feature support that we have in our plugin. Then the other functions are to add instance, to update instance, and to delete an instance. So before we go rushing off and adding more code, let's have a look at what kind of features we could have defined in our supports function. So let's look at the module features. So we've got things like advanced grading, backup module 2, we'll see that again later, a little later on. Completion has rules, completion track views, so stuff to do with completions. Grade stuff, visibility, grade as grade. If your activity supports a grade, we've actually come across this one before. Grade outcomes, groupings and groups, which we've discussed before. Feature, if we wants the support for ID number, so that is default true, so that normally will happen anyway if you don't specify anything. So really you'd only want to do that if you wanted to set that to false. And then feature, the archetype, which we'll discuss a little later on, which we've talked about in the code that we've already done. The intro, which we discussed as well previously. Completions, view links, plagiarism stuff, description, and whether your feature your module supports questions, right? And then now archetype, architectural type, archetype, not quite sure how to pronounce that, but anyway, so we know we are a resource, so we return an archetype resource. We've talked about that. The other ones that are available is assignment, and other, which is an unspecified, and a system one, which appears to be mainly a system, a core kind of mod type. Okay, and in our case we are returning the resource type. So that covers this, the features. Okay, the presentation as usual will be in the lesson, so you can go through this in your own time. So back in our code, you'll notice that add instance and update an instance gets two parameters, and one of them being the form. The actual, what I've called Wikipedia snippet, that first parameter is actually the data from the form. So you get the form and the data of the submission of the form. That requires us to define a form to actually for the user to fill and use when updating or adding a new instance to a course. So let's now revisit our form API. Okay, this is another visit to the form API. So when you, in your code, when you want to work with forms, you get an instance of the form class, and the parameters you pass through are all optional, but these are the standard parameters. Action, so it's auto detect default, it works it out. That would be the URL to which the form is going to be submitted. Custom data, and I bolded that because that's an important piece of data that you will use quite commonly, because that's how you pass data to the form, data that can be used within the form itself. Okay, the method, which is by default post, the target, which is really deprecated now in XHTML, the attributes for the form, whether the form is editable, a Boolean value. So if you've set that false, none of the fields will be editable. And then your Ajax form data goes into the last parameter. Okay. So if you remember from our previous visit to the form, you only had two steps required to add an element to the form, which is add element and set type. Not for all of them, but for most of them, you need to set the type. So let's look at some of the other methods. So add help button. Now we've come across this, we've seen the help button in action in our in previous examples, and we've even specified the help for a couple of our forms before. Okay, so this method requires the name of the form element, so you know which, so you can tie the two together, and really it's not really a button, it's more like a help icon that's displayed next to the element's text. Okay, the identifier help string title and constants. So both the title and the contents should be defined in the strings file. So Moodle gets the title from the string with the identifier specified, and the contents from the identifier specified with an underscore help appended. And so, for example, if the title value is username, then the help contents will be username underscore help. And then the final parameter for add help button is the plugin component's name for where the strings would come from. Okay. The other function, the other method that is useful is the set default method. Now, usually the default value of your elements in a form are set by the set data method, and that usually works if the form fields mirror the database record field names. So let's say if you're taking from configuration values and you want to set them as the default for your forms, you probably need to use your custom data to do that rather than rely on set data. But that would be the standard default behavior, is that the data would be set based on the table record that you are editing or creating. Okay. So if you can't use the set data, like I said, you would then use the custom data parameter to pass in data to your form. Okay. And then you would then use that custom data. It comes into your form as underscore custom data property. You would then use that to set your default for your field. So there's an example there. You set default for no images, and then you get the custom data underscore custom data no images value and set that as the default. Then we carry on with another method, the add rule, which allows you to specify rules for the field. So you would specify things like required. That would make the field required needs to be a value input. Max length, email if it's only an email field, alphanumeric and numeric. So continuing with the add rule, the method requires at least 3 parameters but takes a total of 7. So you've got the element's name, the element that the rule is being applied to, the error message if the input is invalid, and usually got with a get string call, the rule type like we've just mentioned on the previous screen, like required, max length, etc. Optionally, the data required by the rule, so like the maximum length for the max length rule. Optionally, whether to perform the validation on the server or on the client, which is the default. A Boolean value for client-side validation, determining whether the form should be reset if there's an error, and it defaults to false. And then whether to force the rule, a Boolean value, whether to force the rule even if the form element does not exist, which defaults to false. I'm not quite sure why that's there, but you never know. So you can see the documentation at the link in this presentation. Okay. So loosely related to rules, applying rules, are the disabled if and hide if methods. And these basically allow you to disable or hide an element in the form based on another element and its value. So so you can conditionally hide or disable field values. If you remember when we did the course format, the feedback plugin, when we selected our feedback was selected, we had a property for the minutes of the recording, and when you took it off, that disappeared. So that is an example of hide if in action. Okay. So using the create element is usually used to group form elements which have a single label, and we use this again in our feedback plugin where we created our buttons, and there's the add group. So there's a link to the Moodle documentation for the form elements. So there are some special methods defined in our classes, and one of them is add action buttons, which adds action buttons to the form. And the function takes two parameters, whether to display a cancel button, which is default is true, and the text for the submit button, which is the default is save changes from the core strings. So for modules, instead of extending the Moodle form, we have the mod_Moodle form extensions. So our forms extend that class rather than Moodle form itself, and that has some additional functionality, additional methods that relate to course modules. So one of them is standard_intro_elements, which adds an editor to allow the user to enter description. And if we say we support mod intro, then that field should be included. And then we've got the standard course module elements. Those are all the elements that are required for the course modules. So this will add those common fields that we have in our form. And in short, it adds the following: restrict access, tags, and competencies. And then the final one is add action buttons, which kind of overrides the Moodle form one, which adds additional buttons to the form. Okay. So all modules should use this functionality to maintain consistency with all other modules. Now, one thing you might notice here, there's a difference here. In most of the other plugins, we add our fields to a form that's created by the actual core itself. And in this case, it appears that we create the form and then we ask the core to add fields into it. Now, this might be a legacy issue. It does seem to go against the current, the kind of pattern with other module or other plugins, where a lot of times you're just adding fields to an existing form. But that's how it works in Moodle at the moment. Okay, so several steps to defining an element for a form. So you add the element, you set the type, you optionally add some help, and then again optionally set the default value for the form element. There is a handout in lesson 3 when we first met the form API that lists all the core form elements and the expected parameters, just as a reminder. Okay, so let's go back to code. So let's go ahead and define a form for our plugin. So it needs to go into the main folder, and we need a file called mod form. I have to spell it properly. Okay, so this is our form definition. So we've got our usual stuff at the top. We are requiring our Moodle form mod form. That's our extension to extend Moodle form, and our form needs to be named Frankenstyle name _mod_form. Okay, and then all the form definitions, as we've mentioned before, are done in the definition function. So we start off by getting our M form, our Moodle form. Remember, this is the actual form itself, and where we discussed this would be the actual class that we're extending. Yeah, okay, I think we've been through that before. So we're adding a header, we're adding a text, a name for our instance. We're adding a rule that it is required. We are adding a rule that it's got the maximum 255 character length, and it's being checked in the client, and we add a help button for it as well. Okay, We then add in the intro document. So here we're going the mod form, mod Moodle form extensions. So we call that. So that gives us the intro elements, the description field, and then we then add another header. So we're splitting the form a little bit, okay? And then we get the wiki URL, and what do? We pick up. So I could have used set data for this, but in this case, what we're doing is we are using the custom data that's been passed in. If it's not empty and it has a value, we then set that as the value of our field. So we use set default. We set the type as a param URL. We add a rule that is required, and then we're adding a static label. So we're adding a little bit more help in the form. You'll see it when we render when the form is rendered. Then we have some checkboxes to no images, no links. I'm not going to go through these other aspects here. I've already described them to you. So no links, and we're still having some static stuff being generated on the screen, and then include citations. Now you will recognize those, isn't it? Include citations, no links, no images, Wikipedia URL. Yes, that came from our database. Okay, so those are part of our database scheme, our database table. Okay, and you can remember it here in our XML install XML file. I'm going to close this now. I don't think we're going to deal with it again. Okay, so that's our mod form, and we end it by adding in the standard course modules and then adding in the standard action buttons. So that's our form. We need to add quite a few language strings for our form, so let's do that now. So we've added in all these strings here to do with our form. Okay, not going to go through them. You can see them on the screen, and we'll see them when the form is rendered. So additional to this, now we need to provide some capabilities so that the instance can be added to a course and it can be viewed. So we have to create our access file again. So let's do that. And this is our DB access file. So we can add an instance. We've set our properties as expected, our keys as expected. Only editing teacher and manager get the allow, and we do use the clone permissions functionality to get to clone some of the permissions from the Moodle course manage activities capability. And then we have the view for all users in that course. So at the context of a module, we allow users to view the instance. Okay, so that's our capabilities. Again, we need to define some strings, so let's do that as well. Okay, and there's our 2 additional strings to do with our capabilities. So now what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade our plugin and go back to Moodle and have a look at how it will all come together. Okay, so let's upgrade our. But before we actually go back into Moodle, we need to get rid of upgrade PHP. It will affect our install. So let's get rid of that. I'm going to delete it. Okay, and then we'll go and upgrade our plugin. So let's log in and upgrade our plugin. Then let's see if we can add it to let's see what happens if we try and add it into our, what's this? So resource, there's it there. We need to define an icon for our module. But if I click on that, we get the form. We've got our name, the description, which is added in by the extensions, and then we've got our settings, our Wikipedia URL, a bit of static text there, images, whether we want images, whether we want links, and whether we want to include citations, and then we've got our common module settings appearing underneath here, and our special buttons, action buttons down here. Now we're not going to actually fill this in yet. We haven't got the functionality to take the input, so we'll just cancel here, and then we'll go back to our code. So log out again. Okay, before we actually add any more code, I want to continue our discussion on the form API. So you'll remember this slide from our previous presentation. That's our constructor. So what do we do with my form when we've got it? So we have some methods that we can call. These are useful ones. There are many more that you can look at in the code if you wanted to. So we have things like display and render, which prints or gets the form. So then we've got set data, which we've spoken about before, applies the database table values to the form itself. We have a method called validation. So once the form has been submitted, we can actually validate the data that's coming through. So if we've got special ones that we need to pick up, for example, we want to see whether it's an existing file name, etc., we could do some validation, okay? And then the errors are sent back. So you set the errors on the element name in an errors array, and that means the form will be redisplayed with the errors, with your error messages near the element that has caused the issue. And then there's a get data. So get data is when the form is submitted. So when somebody submits the form, you use get data to actually collect the data that's been submitted, and it will be null if the data, if there's no data submitted or the validation fails. You can check if the form's been cancelled, and you can check if the form has been submitted. So generally your process is, now this is working with the form, you would get your form, as we mentioned in the first slide, and then we would optionally read data from the database and apply to the form using the set data, okay? If we were going down that road, if it's being displayed for the first time, check if the form has been cancelled. So you can check if it's cancelled and then act accordingly, usually redirecting the user somewhere else. And then you can check if data has been submitted by using the get data method, and then process that if necessary. If it hasn't been cancelled or submitted, then just display the form with the display method. So that's the general process. So get the form. If you've got an existing record, get it from the database, apply it to the form, check if the form has been cancelled. If it has, act accordingly. We could have switched those two. Check if the data has been submitted, if the submission has been done with get data or is submitted, and then process that, and then redisplay the form if you wanted to, or you could redirect after processing the data. So there's a link in this presentation to how you would use the forms in form process. Yeah. Okay. So back in our code, let's I'm going to add the icon off screen for the module. Remember, we needed an icon. There is an icon that you can download in the lesson to use for this bit, and we need to save it in the pics folder. So new, it's kind of standard pics folder. Yeah. So I'm going to add my icon in there, and then we'll continue. Okay, I've added in my icon. It's an SVG file, which seems to be the preference for Moodle currently. SVG or PNG seem to be flavors of the month. Okay, so now let's add some functionality into this lib.php file. So let's have a look at what we've got. Remember, this is the data that's coming in from the form, and that's the actual form itself. Okay, I'm not quite sure what the thinking was in passing the form, but anyway, that's what happens. So we're going to use the global DB. We get our time. We reset our fields, time created and time modified based on the time. We then check through our input to see whether links has been clicked. If not, we set it to 0. Same with images, and same with citations. There is a different type of checkbox that would set the 0 if it hasn't been selected, but we've used the standard checkbox, so we have to check whether they've been defined in the data that's been sent through. And then basically we insert that object, the Wikipedia data that's come through, the data that's come from the form with our additional fields, and we set it to we insert it into the table. The update instance, same kind of thing happening. We only change the time modified. We definitely now have an ID for the record, so that comes from the instance in the data that's coming through, and then we're checking for our no links, no images, and include citation checkbox values. And then if everything seems to be okay, we then just update the record in the table. Okay, and delete is fairly straightforward. All you get from for delete is the ID of the record that's being deleted, and you basically delete that record with that ID. So at this point, we can add an instance, update an instance, and we can actually delete an instance. However, we still got to work out how we're going to actually get the content and get the content into the course, into the course itself. Okay, and in this case, we are going to use a third-party library. And now let me introduce you to third-party libraries. So, third-party libraries. So a third-party library refers to any library which is not part of Moodle and which is not really part of what you are developing. Okay, and you can view a list of currently included third-party libraries by going to the area in the site administration area, as shown on the screen there. You should actually do this before considering including libraries into your plugin, because it may already have been included. Okay, so according to the documentation, Moodle can only use libraries that use a GPL compatible license, specifically one compatible with the GPL version 3, and there's a link to the Wikipedia article about that type of license. Okay. And then you'll also note that the location of the library files is not stipulated, but there is a use of an XML file, third-party libs.xml, which will describe the library and its location, and that is required if you are using a third-party library. And then two other files that are required for third-party libraries is a Moodle_readme, which and a changes file, which we're not going to cover in this course. So we're basically a readme and then a file that describes any changes that you might have made to the library to make it work with Moodle. Okay, so for more information about third-party libraries, there's a link there to the documentation on the Moodle site. Okay, so the third-party library XML is an XML just describing the third-party library that you've included with your plugin. So you've got information about the location, the name, the version, license type, license version, and it can be as simple. Some of those are optional. If you don't have the details, you don't need to specify them, but at least try and have the location and the name of the library in your third-party libs XML. That gives anybody who's dealing with your code a chance to know that that is not part of the code that you are maintaining. Okay, So other third-party libraries, well, the Zen framework was used in Moodle and was initially in there specifically to support web services and MNET functionality. It was removed without deprecation, one of the very rare occasions when deprecation was not a way of removing stuff from Moodle in Moodle 3.1. So the current advice is to find alternative libraries to do what you need to do. Okay, there are still some pair libraries, so if you navigate to third-party libraries, you'll notice there are several pair libraries listed, and we've spoken about pair libraries before because our Moodle forms are built on top of HTML quick form. Yeah, but a lot of these have not been updated in a while, and there's a link to the tracker in the Moodle tracker to have a look at the issues surrounding pair libraries. So the current advice in the readme.txt file where the pair libraries are included in the lib folder is not to ever use the pair implementations directly, but to write wrapper classes to isolate it from the actual pair implementations. Any modifications to pair libraries must be documented. So this is mainly aimed at the core developers who can put libraries into the lib folder. You as a third-party plugin developer would not necessarily put your third-party libraries in the lib folder. That's Moodle core. You'd keep it within your remit, your area, your plugins folders. Okay, and the rule that third-party libraries should have the GPL version 3 compatible license is not even strictly followed for the included pair libraries. So our plugin is going to use PHP class Wikipedia snippet, which is available from GitHub. However, there's a download, a zip file in the lesson to allow you to just get the code, and then can you save all those files in the classes wiki snippet folder. Okay, so do that now before we carry on with the course. So back in our code, I've downloaded the library and I put it in classes Wikipedia snippet, and this is the third-party library. So what do we need to do? We need to add in a Moodle readme file. So let's create that new file, and it's called Moodle readme text. There's not much to it basically. If I just put that aside, it basically third-party library readme, talking about the Mukudu PHP class Wikipedia snippet, and some instructions as to how you would maintain that. Okay, it could be more elaborate, but that's all we need for the library to be maintained. Okay, so we'll move that aside, and then the next thing we need to do is obviously include our XML file, which needs to sit in our top folder. So new file, third party libs.xml. Very simple XML file. Like I said, always try and at least do the location and the name of the libraries. So that's our XML file. Now I think we've taken up all the time for this lesson, and so we're going to finish here, and we will continue with the development of our module in lesson 11. So let's review what we've done in this lesson. So that is it for lesson 10. We developed a resource module plugin, which we'll continue to do in lesson 11. We looked at the data definition API, including the database management class. We looked at the upgrade API. We revisited the form API, and we've just had a look at third-party libraries and incorporated it into our project.